Hallå allihopa! Varmt välkomna till Timbro. Jag heter Karin Svanborg Sjövall. Jag är den hyfsat förkylda vd:n på det här bygget. And at this point I think I'll switch to English, both to welcome the audience, to all of you who've come here on this very short notice, but also of course to the viewers who are listening and looking at the seminar online as we're broadcasting it. But the most important welcome is, of course, to our eminent guest who is here today, Mr. Nigel Evans. Sorry. A very prominent member of the Conservative Party and of the Parliament in the UK. It was an unexpected but very welcome treat to learn that you were in town and that you were willing to come here and join on this discussion and to talk a bit more about Brexit and perhaps also shed some light on the rather extraordinary events that have taken place in Britain as of late. There are a number of things we could talk about, the election of Jeremy Corbyn perhaps being one. Now, for Sweden, the Brexit issue is really pivotal, and yet it's something that is really not being very discussed at all, perhaps because we don't know when the election will be. But it is clear that the relationship between the UK and the EU is something that will widely affect the relationship between Sweden and the UK as well. So it is a topic that we should really keep our eyes on. And that's why I'm also very happy that this surprise event for us marks a bit of a starting point for a discussion that we will keep on having this fall. So for those of you who are interested, keep your eyes on our website, because this is not the last we'll hear of this at Timbro either. The setup for today is rather simple. We'll have the privilege of listening to Nigel speak for about 30 minutes. Then I will join in on the discussion for about 15 minutes. And after that, I would like to invite the audience to ask intelligent questions. And please keep them questions and intelligent and not off-the-cuff lectures, because that will make it a lot easier for us to have a good conversation that will finish promptly at 1 o'clock as promised. So that said, again, Nigel, a very warm welcome, and the floor is yours.
No, well, thank you very much, and it's a delight to be here at Timbro. It's amazing to be here in Stockholm speaking to an audience that I assume are all Swedish, mostly, and yet you all speak English better than I do, which is normally the case, which I found certainly over the last 24 hours being here, but it is a delight. I've been a Member of Parliament for 24 years, a member of the Conservative Party, and now, of course, a supporter of the Conservative government. You asked about what had gone on in Britain recently. As you know, David Cameron has been Prime Minister since 2010 in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. Then we had the general election in 2015, that's this year. And in May of this year, the coalition partners, the Liberal Democrats, were slaughtered, and they're down to just 8 seats. And the Conservatives are now in control with a majority of 12. The Liberal Democrats now being pushed to one side. The party of protest were UKIP, the United Kingdom Independence Party. A lot of my former friends in the Conservative Party have joined UKIP. The Conservative Party is, in the main, a Eurosceptic party. I told you I've been an MP for 24 years. We've only ever had one referendum in the United Kingdom on our relationship with the European Union, and that was in 1975. When Edward Heath, a Conservative Prime Minister, took us into Europe, he did so without a referendum whatsoever. Harold Wilson, the Labour Prime Minister who took over from him, decided that one issue that he could put to a referendum would be this. It allowed the British people to have a say, and it dug him out of a hole with his own party. One might argue that the United Kingdom being offered another referendum at this moment helps to dig David Cameron out of a hole as well. But the only thing with referendums is you never know where they will go. Many people here who believe, because of all the benefits that the European Union have given us, it's a little bit like that old joke, what have the Romans ever done for us? One could say, what has the European Union ever done for us? And then you will rattle out, I'm absolutely certain, a long list from a single European market to being on the world stage and being able to take on the United States of America and having some form of presence that we otherwise wouldn't have. So why is it, therefore, with what we have all benefited from, that this week when I sat round a table of 20 people at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester, we were a mixed bunch, some MPs, some non-MPs, and I said, if the referendum was tomorrow, how many would vote to leave? 3/4 put their hands up. So, anybody who thinks that they can predict the outcome of the next referendum, think again. All we know, and David Cameron touched on it in his speech at the party conference, is that we see the European Union as something not that we joined in 1973. It's become remote, it's become expensive, it's a bullying organization, it's very protectionist, and it's not where we want to be. Part of the essence of the European Union is an ever closer union, deeper. Monsieur Hollande this week was irritated by Nigel Farage. Now, who can blame him for being irritated by Nigel Farage? It's why Nigel Farage has been put on this earth. To irritate people, he does it supremely well. But we shouldn't always rise to the bait. Monsieur Hollande did, and he said, if you don't want a deeper European Union, then the logical consequence is to leave. Now, David Cameron will be having discussions with Angela Merkel today. I suspect the conversation will be somewhat more diplomatic than Monsieur Hollande's response to Nigel Farage. Some of the things that David Cameron has been asking for, which has never been on the table before, all of a sudden is now something that can be bargained for. And there's a lot in common with the United Kingdom and Sweden in how we see developments within the European Union. You should always have a lucky general. In David Cameron, we have a lucky general. This is a man who, after winning a coalition, is able to become Prime Minister at a time when oil was at $50 a barrel. Who could have predicted that? And then, with the migration crisis, which you are feeling very deeply in Sweden, all of a sudden border controls is something that is now being discussed. And when we are told that we cannot say to people who come to work in the United Kingdom that their children who remain at home, we say, why should you have child benefit? You're not in the United Kingdom. When that was off the table, now that's on the table. And benefit transition or reform is now something worth talking about. And then, of course, the luckiest thing for him ever, Jeremy Corbyn becomes leader of Her Majesty's official opposition. Who could have predicted that? A man who, when he became leader of the Labour Party, when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, I'm going to say that again, when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, I never thought I would ever utter those words in that way. Jeremy is somebody who has always been Eurosceptic, and indeed, when he was asked about the European Union, would not give an assurance that he wouldn't campaign to leave the European Union, and it was only when pressure was put on him, he said finally that no, he wants to stay. We'll see. But today, a new organization has been formed within the United Kingdom. It's called Vote, Leave, Take Control. It's an all-party group of Conservative, Labour, and the one UKIP Member of Parliament. Please remember, whilst they scored 4 million votes in the United Kingdom, we have a somewhat different system of voting called first past the post. So whilst they got 8,000 to 7,000 votes throughout the country, you still have to win in each individual seat to get your members of parliament. We don't have a list system at all. in the European elections, they won using the system of PR that we have there. Anyway, so this new organization has started. It's being backed by some very big money from some business people, and they expect to spend £20 million between now and whenever that referendum takes place. When will the referendum take place? Before the end of 2017. We know that there will be a 6-month notice as to when the referendum will take place, so that there's going to be absolutely no bouncing whatsoever of the British people into voting one way or the other. We also know that there will be no Conservative Party money spent one way or the other on this particular referendum, and the machinery of government will not be allowed to be used either. There's going to be one organization that will be for, and there'll be one umbrella organization that will be against leaving the European Union. And so, what is on the shopping list for David Cameron negotiating some form of reform of the European Union? Anybody know? No, because I don't know either. And, you know, I'm fairly well at the center of it. And David won't say what's on the shopping list because he wants to use as much leverage as he possibly can in his negotiations. And then at the end of it, he will be able to say whether he believes that he has achieved what he wants. Everybody believes in the United Kingdom that David Cameron wishes to remain within the European Union. And in fact, you know, I know that that's what he wants to do. But he has also said that if he comes back and he's not happy with what the package happens to be for the United Kingdom, he can rule nothing in or out. That's pretty loose code for he might just say that we ought to leave the European Union. But, as I said, I have a lucky general at the top of my party. And it just may be that he is able to negotiate a package of reforms which will be something a little bit more substantial than keeping the Queen's head on postage stamps and retaining the pint of beer as the staple food of the United Kingdom. Something a little bit more substantial than that, where benefit reforms, border controls, therefore immigration, and the recognition of subsidiarity as being something more meaningful than just rhetoric, which you trot out now and again when we have yet another treaty being discussed whereby more power is being centralized. It's a little bit more than stopping the circus between Strasbourg and Brussels every year, which costs over €100 million just to pacify the French. It's ridiculous. I mean, why is that allowed to happen? Only in Monty Python would something like that go unanswered, but so it does. So we are looking for something a bit more substantial. The opinion polls, who trusts the opinion polls? They got it wrong at the general election, so I really wouldn't pay any regard to them whatsoever. And it's far too early at this moment in time to say exactly what the British people will do. We were promised a vote on the Lisbon Treaty. We never had it. Why do you think that was? And it wasn't simply because the Lisbon Treaty changed. It morphed into something that it originally wasn't, because the document was 98% exactly the same as the other Lisbon Treaty after the tinkering. And my belief is that Tony Blair had done his research. They'd worked out, they'd done their own independent polling and found out that probably 70% of the British people would have voted against the Lisbon Treaty. And we know that when, you know, the Irish have voted against a couple of treaties, they've always been allowed by Brussels another vote to get it right the second time. I suspect that had Britain voted against the Lisbon Treaty, there would not have been a second vote. But I also believe that Brussels, being sometimes an arrogant organization, which is led by people that nobody knows, would have salami-sliced the Lisbon Treaty and put it into operation in various ways outside of a treaty. who doesn't believe that that wouldn't have happened. And that is because the project is so enormous and is being driven by some people who believe that ever closer union, deeper integration, a United States of Europe is where this journey is going, and only people who believe that have vision. You have to back that vision in order to be in favor of your own country. I don't believe that. I believe that the European Union is made up of 28 sovereign nation states. And I believe that subsidiarity means devolving power as closely to the individual as you possibly can. This is an issue of governance, as well as what is in the best interests of the Brussels bureaucrats, who, as I said, most of you may struggle with some of the names as to who these people are. And so when that referendum comes, I can't say with any certainty how I will vote. But I will tell you this, that if I am unhappy with the package that David comes back, not only will I vote to leave the European Union, which may actually, in some of your minds now, you may be thinking, how can anybody say that? Because we do have some people who philosophically believe in the United Kingdom that irrespective of what David comes back with, they're going to vote to stay in. And others who say they'll vote to leave. For me, I will look very, very critically at what David comes back with. And if I'm not happy, I will vote to leave the European Union. And I don't think you can go into a negotiation saying, if you don't give us what we want, I will go back to my country and recommend that everybody votes to stay in the European Union. That's not much of a leverage when you're negotiating with the likes of Angela Merkel and other European leaders. I very much hope that we can get a Europe much similar to what it was when we joined in 1973, one which we were told was more of a trading bloc rather than an institution, an embryo that was going to grow up into being something that it wasn't. We're told on a regular basis that when you join a club, you accept the rules. Well, the rules have changed so much since 1973. I'm a member of 4 clubs in London, and I tell you now, if they start changing the rules and I don't like the club, I'm going to leave. And I believe that it is quite possible in 2018 the United Kingdom may not be members of the European Union. The next 12 months or so are going to be absolutely critical as to what we are going to do and what the British nation is going to say. The most important thing is that for the first time since 1975, at least, the British people are being given a say in a referendum. I mean, it is absolutely bonkers when you talk about constitutions and governance and democracy that the British people have been denied a say for so long. I am absolutely delighted that my Prime Minister has at least got the guts to turn to the British people and say, this is about the governance of you. Now, the only thing that I'll end with this, is we are in uncharted territory. Nobody has joined the European Union and ever left. Does that mean that it's not going to happen? Let's wait and see. It's only a matter of months, and we'll all have our answer. I'm happy to have the dialogue and then take any questions you like.
Thank you very much, Nigel. I think before we get into the discussion, just to sort of keep people up to speed a little bit about how the discussion is going back in the UK, could you just briefly tell us what are the other players in the game except for the politicians, the trade unions, the business organizations, and what are their main arguments on the pro and con side?
I think the organizations like the CBI, Confederation of British Industry, represent larger businesses. In the main, they want to stay in the European Union. The Institute of Directors represent more smaller businesses. 1,000 of them signed a letter to say, we are happy that this referendum is taking place. We will see what David Cameron comes back with, and if we don't like it, we may well leave. So that's outside of the politicians. You've then got the trade union movement, and I think you'll see them falling all over the place. I don't think they're all going to speak with one voice when it comes to this. The arguments are quite clear. And it's what I said right at the beginning, which is that when you're a market of 500 million plus, that you've got greater clout if you can all work together, that you can take on a number of other economic blocks. You can do trade deals with them, as there is happening now under the negotiations with TTIP and various other economic blocks as well. You've got some very big business organizations like JCB, where the owner of that has said that if he's unhappy, that he will recommend leaving the European Union. On the other side, you've got people like Richard Branson, who will, irrespective of what happens, say we should stay in the European Union. Have to remember, of course, Richard was the man who said that Britain should join the euro. Thank God we didn't. And you must be incredibly pleased that you still are on your own currency and not saddled with the euro. So that we can put the currency at least distinctly to one side. I don't know what's wrong with variable geometry, which allows certain countries to go at different speeds. If France and Germany want to join at the hip, let them do so. I've got no problem with that whatsoever. But when there are other countries that don't want to sign up to this deeper, ever closer union, why can't they operate at different speeds? You guys are in Schengen, we are not. You know, neither of us are in the single currency. There are certain other aspects to treaties that we have not signed up to. So I don't understand what the problem is with an a la carte version, variable geometry of the European Union, which can actually satisfy everybody.
Because that's what I've been sort of struggling to understand. If the demands that Cameron is meaning to take on Europe, is that about having more British exemptions, or is it actually about reforming Europe?
I think it's going to be a bit of both, because if he does it on his own, then clearly it's all about what's in the best interest of the United Kingdom. But I'm not privy to the negotiations that he's having with other prime ministers throughout the European Union as well. We know that he's gone around, Philip Hammond, our Foreign Secretary, George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, David Lidington, the Minister of Europe. They've had negotiations ever since the general election has finished, and indeed, I suspect, before that even started. And so, if Britain does it on its own, then clearly that will all be about basically allowing the exemptions as to where Britain wants to go. But it's got to be a little bit more than that, I would think. And just as when I told you earlier on that border controls was not on the agenda at one stage, with the tragedy that has emerged from what's gone on through Syria, then clearly border controls is back on the agenda. And I mean, the one thing that I'm staggered at is the number of migrants that Sweden has taken. This week you will have taken 8,000 migrants alone. Do you know that is a staggering number of people? And at some stage, you won't be able to keep pace with that, I wouldn't think. I mean, I really do feel for you, because I didn't know this, that this was happening in Sweden, not far from the United Kingdom. We intend over the next 4 years to take 20,000 migrants. We're spending £1 billion a year on our international development budget in order to give assistance, but within the region. I mean, you taking 8,000 in 1 week is a substantial number, particularly considering the population of Sweden. So border controls, I would think of at some stage, has got to be properly looked at.
Well, it is, actually. There was a suggestion, I think, about 1 hour ago, where the Conservative Party in Sweden did suggest that. So I would say it's definitely on the menu. On the other hand, I mean, there is a paradox here, because I think unlike Sweden, which has a track record of integration not being all that great, the UK has actually managed to absorb millions of people from Eastern Europe rather successfully. And I know that immigration is a big issue in this debate as well, and it's very intertwined into the negotiations. But can you separate the sort of the discomfort or the distress over the fact that you've had a lot of immigration intra-European immigration from the fact that we now have a refugee crisis coming from outside. Are these issues intertwined, or are they two separate discussions?
They're both, absolutely both. I mean, it's not just those from without the European Union, though. It's also the movements that happen within the European Union as well. And the net migration into the United Kingdom from within and outside was more than 300,000 last year into the United Kingdom. And at some stage, you have to have some balance. That doesn't mean no to immigration into the United Kingdom. My goodness me, haven't we benefited from the diversity and the number of people that have come over decades into the United Kingdom, and indeed the free flow of people from the United Kingdom to the other parts of the world as well. I don't expect that to stop, but I do expect it to be more controlled. I remember when the 10 countries joined the European Union, our civil servants said between 13 and 16,000 people would come to the United Kingdom. Well, I think that happened in week 1. The figure was closer to 1 million by the time that it finished. It's at that level, and that was from within the EU, that you really can't cope.
So what exactly is it that Cameron wants in terms of immigration, in terms of this renegotiation
Well,
with the EU?
it's going to be some form of control on immigration so that we can manage it properly.
That's
I mean,
fluffy.
yes, but I mean,
Some
we don't know the full list, as I said, because he has not said. So we'll know when David makes the announcement as to when the negotiation is finished, as to where he's going to go on this. So it's going to be not just benefits, but it is going to be some level of control on immigration. I mean, I suspect the area where we got it wrong was when we, and we've been a country that has always pushed for more countries to join the European Union, but when the 10 were admitted, when Germany and France had controls, they had derogations on the number of people that could come in to their countries, we didn't. I see that as an error. It was a big mistake. Had it been more controlled, then maybe we would have been in a different position. But derogations are time limited, as we know, and eventually you've got to come to terms with that.
I'm not so sure, but okay. I know that one of the major arguments from the sort of the getting out camp is that Britain has been losing clout, partly because of enlargement, but also for other reasons as well. And if you want to be a bit mean about this, could the fact that the shopping list has not been presented, even though there's been threats of a referendum for about 2 years, has that perhaps aggravated the situation, perhaps, that one tends to end up in the margins of political discussion if you're threatening to leave, but you can't really sort of formulate, a firm response of what it is that you want?
Yeah, it's formulated, and it's formulated with the people who are going to make the decision at this stage. We will know exactly what David has achieved as far as the new relationship between the United Kingdom and Europe, at least 6 months prior to the referendum taking place. I've got absolutely, no problems with that, really. And if you are in a negotiating position, I can understand why you would take that particular position, which he has. Because of, and I suspect, the various treaties that have taken place where we've had no say whatsoever, and I feel bitterly aggrieved that the British people didn't have a say on the Lisbon Treaty, because it was very, very fundamental to some of the changes that have taken place, including the external action service that is now taking place throughout the whole of the world, which is costing, €1 billion, if you're happy with that, to replicate what we have in high commissions and embassies throughout the world. I'm not, just for just for status. Now, that's not going to be on David's shopping list, I suspect. But there'll be a number of other issues, and that it's going to be up for the British people once they've seen what that relationship is going to be. And I do hope that that it's going to be a fairly fought campaign. I mean, I can fairly well predict that those who want to stay in will say that if you vote to leave on Monday, unemployment will be 5 million by Tuesday. We know that. There's going to be a lot of scare tactics. And I also would say, for those who are on the out campaign, it's not good enough to say what you're leaving, because everybody knows what that is. You have to say what you're going into. That's going to be their biggest dilemma. That's going to be the challenge for those who want to pull out of the European Union. And it's going to be a very interesting debate, but it's going to be hard fought. And I know that when Sweden voted to go into the European Union, it was incredibly tight. It was incredibly tight. But we're not voting to go in. We're voting whether we should pull out of something we're already in. And we just have to recognize that. We may not please everybody. I know Barack Obama, the President of the United States, has said that Britain should remain within the European Union. Well, I thought the United States should have stayed within the United Kingdom. Didn't have much clout 200 years ago. We'll see.
Fair point.
It hasn't seemed to have done the United States much damage pulling away from the UK. Not my most serious point.
That is a key question, though. I mean, what is it? I mean, I suppose this does have to do with loyalty and identity as well. Is this about the people who want out? Is that primarily because they don't feel that they belong within the European family, that this is an island, and you sit on your island, or is it about the transatlantic link, where again Mr. Obama is very keen for you to stay a part of the European family? I mean, you can't move the island to the mid-Atlantic, can you?
Well, with the number of wind turbines we have on Britain, it'll just take one windy day and we'll just move further north, I think. Do you know, the special relationship with the United States, I have learned over the years, is that we believe that we have a spatial relationship with the United States of America, and America allows us to believe that we have a special relationship with the United States of America. So I'm not so blinkered as to believe that we have to ensure that we're a trading nation, that we have to have to preserve and to grow the trade that we do. We don't operate, as you say, in splendid isolation on an island all of our own. We've recently come out of a referendum with Scotland. Scotland themselves had a referendum as to whether they should leave the United Kingdom. My goodness me, we've been together a bit longer than 1973. Had Scotland voted to leave, they would have left. There is no two ways about it. And that's all about sovereignty. And when you talk about why it is that people will vote in certain ways, it is so confused because people will vote yes or no for different reasons. Some because they believe that we should never have joined in the first place. Others because it's not the same organization that we joined in 1973. Others because of that circus of moving between Strasbourg and Brussels. Others because they've read something this morning in the Daily Mail about the European Union and they are distressed by it. I mean, who knows? People vote in different ways, but all I would say to you is that the Conservative Party have got a majority of 12. That even surprised David Cameron, I understand, on the day after the election results came in. Just add the majorities of the 12 seats together and you'll see how slim it is. But you know, the way the system works is that once you've won that majority, you form the government and you get on with it. And all I can say is that when Britain votes before the end of 2017, whatever they decide, that's what's going to happen, and there will not be a second referendum.
But part of the referendum, the Scottish referendum, was that it was fairly close there too. I mean, up till about a week, it was really 50-50. So, I mean, don't you fear that if you leave the Union, that this will actually cause more disintegration within the UK as well? I mean, I know that there are commentators saying that it's a done deal, basically, that if you do leave the European Union, then Scotland is out.
Yep, and then I've heard from Nicola Sturgeon that that's what she wants to do, that should we leave the European Union, then she will immediately set up another referendum, then Scotland will leave, and then they will join the European Union. Well, there's a couple of problems there. One of the problems is, aren't you going to consult the Scottish people first as to whether they want to join the European Union or not? There may be some who actually want to leave the United Kingdom, but they don't want to be part of the European Union either. I mean, that is a possibility. So democracy really should mean that you consult your people first. The second problem, which I think is a little bit more intractable, is it does need the support of the rest of the European Union countries for somebody else to join. Spain has a problem with Catalonia. They believe that if they would vote for Scotland to join the European Union, that the chances of Catalonia exiting from Spain and doing exactly the same thing will also be a possibility too. So, as far as I understand it, Spain has already said that they would not be prepared to support that.
Can we get back to Jeremy Corbyn? I love talking about Jeremy Corbyn.
So do I.
For good reason. I know that the head of Labour's referendum campaign is Alan Johnson,
Absolutely.
who is very well respected.
Absolutely.
I think all across the board. How do you think they sort of equal each other out, one being sort of a problem for the campaign and one other being a benefit?
I think Alan Johnson is a great boon for the Stay In campaign. He's somebody I greatly respect. He is a moderate, and had he put his name forward as one of the leader candidates the other day, then my great fear would have been that he would have been elected. That is now not the case, but that doesn't mean the fact that he is at the head of that campaign for the Labour Party means that he is well respected, and I'm sure that there are some people who may waver who will listen very carefully to what Alan Johnson has to say. So that's a great boost, I would say, to their campaign. But not all of the Labour Party support staying in. The majority do, large majority, but you've got people like Kate Hoey, who is incredibly well respected, Kelvin Hopkins, and a number of other Labour politicians who have decided, Graham Stringer from Manchester, that they believe Britain would be better off outside the European Union, and they've joined this new organisation that's been launched today in the United Kingdom. I mean, if you're looking, I mentioned Nigel Farage earlier on as well. If I was heading the Out campaign, I'd want to keep Nigel Farage as far away from the campaign as possible. His irritational factor is so high, it's off the Richter scale with a lot of people, and you do get associated with the friends you keep. I believe that if Nigel plays too prominent a role in that campaign, he's going to scare, I think, a lot of people. As I said, they've got to come up with rational and calm reasons why the United Kingdom would be better off outside the European Union, and they haven't done that yet.
Because I would think that if you combine Corbyn probably turning the UK into a conservative one-party state for the next half decade or so, with the fact that Lib Dems have been basically eradicated, there's not that much strong support left on that campus there.
People vote in different ways irrespective of the party they vote for. For instance, the Liberal Democrats scored incredibly well at the previous general election, and they did so, not the one that's just gone, the one before that. And it is amazing how many people switched from the Liberal Democrats to UKIP this time. Now, it's not a journey I can work out in my mind. You go from the most federalist, pro-European party to the one that wants to get out of the European Union, and they would do so without a referendum if they could. How does that journey work? And it is because every party is a coalition. And so people who voted Lib Dem in the past did so because they were the party of protest. When they were part of the government, they couldn't be part of the party of protest. And so there'll be people within the Labour Party who vote Labour because they believe that we should have the renationalisation of the railways. Jeremy Corbyn. And maybe, some other enterprises that are now privatised back into state control. That may be their number one. Europe may be way down their list of things. And they are able to separate the two, and irrespective of what the party leadership says, they may well go a different way to it. And of course, that may be the problem with David Cameron, that whereas he will say, I want you all to now vote to stay in the European Union, of course, we're all going to have our own vote, and it's a secret ballot. And there is as I said earlier on, no party funds will be used one way or the other. And whilst it's not been fully clarified yet, I know there's a lot of demand to make sure that ministers, once the campaign starts, are able to have freedom of conscience to campaign whichever way they like without losing their jobs.
Will that be allowed?
Don't know. But I think that it would do enormous damage to the cabinet and the ministerial team within the United Kingdom if they're not given that latitude.
Because one would think otherwise that the sort of stay inside would have been strengthened by the fact that Cameron did win the election and rather handsomely as well. That this would have shifted the sort of the structure of power within the party as well. That there's been a very loud anti-Europe clique within the Conservative Party, but that after the election that would have strengthened his position. But you sound like that's not the case.
No, I don't think it is the case. We've got some very bright young people that have come in. There's another little... Listen, it's already messy. Let's make it a bit messier, shall we? David Cameron has already announced at the party conference that he will not lead the Conservative Party into the next general election. What does that mean? It now means, at the party conference that we've just had, there was some jockeying of people who would rather like to be Prime Minister. So you've got people like George Osborne, who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, incredibly competent, and you've got somebody called Boris Johnson, who's Mayor of London, who is incredibly popular and competent as well. They, I would say, are the two leading contenders for the leadership of the party. There are others. Now then, what are they going to say about our relationship with the European Union? That's going to be important because, of course, the referendum will come before the new leadership is chosen. And, of course, the Tory party, who get to vote on the leadership, will be looking very carefully at what the characters say during that referendum campaign. It's got a bit messier, isn't it?
So that also, I mean, that must make the timing of the referendum itself rather important. I mean, if Cameron is leaving and you don't want it in the general elections campaigns.
It won't be in the general election campaign, definitely won't. That will be 2020. We've got fixed-term parliaments now. And whilst that legislation remains, 2020 it is. We know that the referendum will be for the end of 2017. That doesn't mean it won't come sooner.
No.
And maybe that will just happen. Once David is happy that he's got the package that he wants to present to the country, he's only got to give 6 months' notice and we will have that referendum. So that could easily happen next year. But he's already announced he's leaving, and that does add a further equation into a rather complicated equation as it currently is.
Would you say it's likely even that it will happen next year?
Impossible to tell.
Excellent. Now, I think it's probably time to allow the audience to have their say. We have the microphone over there. Please talk into it loudly so that our viewers on internet can hear us all.
I'm Hans Jeppsson. I have a background as a former State Secretary for Foreign Trade. It's a very interesting example of diplomatic efforts of the Prime Minister to have you giving this excellent speech, bullying us to believe that.
Oh, I wish that he'd asked me to give this speech.
But nevertheless, first of all, I think you are wrong about the Lisbon Treaty being able to be introduced piecemeal through some back door. Almost every month, the court in Luxembourg strikes down on decisions that the Council and Parliament has taken that is outside the realm of the treaty. And that is really my question. Imagine that in 2026, for some reason, the change of leader in the Tory party failed. And Jeremy Corbyn, or a lookalike, is returned to Westminster ahead of a Labour majority. And you have left the European Union. Would you speculate on what would happen to leave the European Union and thus leave the whole structure of checks and balances that the European Union gives for the rights of companies, for the right of individuals, etc., and leave that totally open in a country without a constitution to the whips and whims of a Labour Parliament, to nationalise industries, to do all kinds of things. What do you think about that? Is that a scenario that will scare people?
Well, it's all got to be done with the will of the people. As I said, there's going to be a lot of scare stories between now and the referendum. I think what we've really got to do is get to the essentials of the facts. That's the important thing. I mean, I'm asked about what my view is on fracking. And my goodness me, I've seen some scare stories about fracking, and I've heard the other side as well about how important it is. It seems to work in America and all that sort of stuff, and we can't turn our back on an industry that's going to give us billions. And I always say, let the science speak. And the science is the truth and the facts, and that's what I'm going to drill down to, which is what is going to happen. What I do know, as a trading nation, the United Kingdom imports more than we export. And are you saying that there's a possibility that the European Union will cut off its nose to spite its face and put up all sorts of barriers to trade with the United Kingdom? I mean, I've already read that somewhere. I would rather hope that they wouldn't do that, seeing as it's in the benefit of the European Union. They carry on the trade that they currently do, and I know that there's a number of other countries that operates outside of the European Union that seem to do that. I'm thinking of Switzerland immediately and Norway. And I know one of the arguments, I know you're nodding, but one of the arguments on that is that Norway has to comply with a lot of directives that come forward, whether they like it or not, and they're not even at the negotiating table. So, you know, we will see. But I would rather hope that the World Trade Organization and everything that we sign up to at least will give protection to any country that would like to leave the European Union. The one thing I've learned over my 24 years in politics at the Westminster level, and I did 6 years at local authority before then, is that politics changes and reforms even in a mature democracy like the United Kingdom. We've seen massive devolution to Scotland, to Wales and Northern Ireland since that time. So who could have predicted that change of relationships? We're seeing mayors now being elected in big cities throughout the whole of the United Kingdom who are having power and budgets devolved to them outside of Whitehall. These are all the changing relationships that are occurring within the United Kingdom. And I just think that this thing on governance, how the people are governed, is vitally important. To me, I'll just say this one thing. We call election day in the United Kingdom decision day. It's when power goes back from governments to the people. I think that is so vitally important. When people are able to put forward their projects and their programs in manifestos and say what they want to do. It allows an incoming government, when another government's being chucked out, to enact their program. If their hands are tied by many of the things that have been signed up by previous governments in treaties for which we didn't even have a say in a referendum, I actually think that's a denial of democracy. It's a democratic thing for me as well. So, you know, the relationship just needs to, that's why I think a looser relationship is going to be far more in the interests of peoples as well.
So I have one question about the common agricultural policy. Do you have discussed that? And I think actually Greenland left the European Union. However, it's a big island, but a very small economic market. Thank you.
Yeah, it's. I represent an agricultural constituency, and maybe this is one area where some reforms will be made, so that budgets are returned, and in order for sovereign governments to support their own farming industry in the way that they can. All I know is a lot of my farmers, even with the common agricultural policy, which is costing billions, I've got farmers who are producing milk, and they're getting less for it than the cost of production. Some of them have gone through over the past few years. A bottle of water, mineral water in shops is more expensive than milk in Britain. And so the common agricultural policy is not something that seems to have benefited my farmers.
Neither in Sweden.
Yeah, it's a real worry, actually.
ask you, because I had one thing still that I feel I need to get off my chest before we leave, and that's, you said that you may be entering uncharted territory if you decide to pull out. Doesn't the risks bother you at all? I mean, you might say that the timing isn't great. The European Union is not in perfect shape. We have waves of populism and right-wing propaganda all over the place, and you know that the consequences might actually be dire. Doesn't this bother you at all?
Gosh, I think I'm already hearing the in campaign part of their argument, and the risks are something you have to take on board. You'd be mad not to. Every general election, you have to weigh up the consequences of which way you vote for whichever political party. And so you're absolutely right. I will be looking exactly at the risks that the country would take before I finally make my decision. But having said that, I think it is important to make it absolutely clear that if I'm not happy with the package that comes back, there is the prospect that I'll vote to leave the European Union. So it's got to be there. It's got to be there. Maybe the risks we would look at are greater at staying in on a European Union that is ever integrated, ever closer, and the consequences of where that's going to lead us over the next 20 years. And then maybe it will be I don't know, joined at the hip throughout the whole of the 28 that we will have a government of a United States of Europe. I mean, some people actually want a USE. They think it's a jolly good idea. And, it's a debate worth having. Absolutely. And if people think that that's what we should have, then why don't we elect the President of the United States of Europe? Why don't we ensure that that President then selects the cabinet, that it's not one from every country and all that sort of stuff? Let's have a proper discussion about how a democratic United States of Europe would look. But let's not hoodwink the people into thinking that it's just a trading bloc, really, when by several treaties that have been signed up to by various governments over the years, including my own, the Maastricht Treaty, it's not the same organization that it was.
Jonas Berggren from the Confederation of Swedish Enterprise, the Swedish CBI. I'm a little bit puzzled. You put a lot of emphasis on the package. Aren't you worried that although I'm sure there is going to be a package, but it will basically be intentions, protocols, whatever, signed by a number of countries, and so it's basically not possible to make anything more solid than that, because treaty change is basically out only by looking at the time frame is impossible. So basically it will be a lot of promises from Angela Merkel or whoever. Will that be enough?
Time will tell. That's part of the negotiating position of David Cameron, which is that if it's seen as a lot of blancmange or a souffle, although I rather like souffle, I have to say, but it's more air than substance, then the people will see through that, I'm absolutely certain. I mean, I can't even tell you which way the newspapers will they'll take different angles. I mean, the Express, I can tell you now, will say vote to leave. They do on a fairly daily basis. But as far as the other newspapers are concerned, I haven't got the faintest idea. It's only then when they get a full analysis of the souffle as to how much substance is in it, as to the recommendations that they will finally make.
Short question. The centralization, you have talked about the centralization of the European Union. And do you think when Eastern Europe has come into it, doesn't it become a bit more trouble for Brussels? Because the Poles don't like bullying. They have been bullied by the Russians for centuries and decades. And doesn't it mean that the Brussels will have to more or less stop this centralization because it simply doesn't work, and there is no, people are not backing it, and the protests are becoming more and more.
I mean, it's not just our Swedish friends that we're relying on to help us with the negotiations. You're quite right. There are a number of other countries that have joined. And just because you've joined the club, you may not like all the rules that are there. And actually, part of it is the Carlton Club in Britain, when I joined, it was men only. Now women are able to join. My goodness me, how revolutionary is that? Not only that, but we're allowed not to wear a tie on a Friday. All right, so the rules change. And that's because club members have voted on these things and have said, yes, come on, let's get with the times. And yes, we've got a lot of friends, thank goodness, within the EU. And it's good, and it's healthy for democracy that we talk about reform. It's not just leaving, it's also reforming organizations that you don't like. Just as we've reformed within the United Kingdom over the 24 years that I've been an MP, then why should reform of the European Union be sacrosanct and that it's something that shouldn't even be debated? I mean, that's silly.
And I think on that note, we will finish reform, a very good last note, actually. Thank you so much, Nigel, for coming here today. Thank you all for joining us here today. I hope to see you soon back again. Thank you.
Thanks very much,
Big applause.
everybody. Thank you.